Hey everybody, I'm Mike Kasmer. Today we're going to be taking a look at the 2021 Commencal Meta TR. Now that model name may sound familiar. That's because we recently featured it in our Value Bikes field test just a few months ago, but they've already updated it. So what's new for 2021? Well, first off, there's more travel. 140 millimeters out back, that's up from 130 millimeters, and a couple of the models are spec'd with 160 millimeter forks, and while other ones have 150 millimeter forks. So you're looking at a 140, 150 or a 140, 160 bike. Commencal decided to make this more of a mini-enduro bike rather than as much of a trail bike. It's kind of splitting hairs, but when we did test the previous version, it felt a lot like that style of bike, something that's a little bit more oriented towards the downhill sections of the trail, get to the top, but it's kind of a big presence. So they just decided to embrace it, and that's what we've got here. There were some changes to the frame shape itself. You'll see some of the lines have been cleaned up. Seat tube height is a little bit lower. Now runs a 34.9 millimeter diameter post. That's just in order to allow it to accommodate longer travel dropper posts. But the overall look isn't drastically changed, but the geometry did undergo a significant revision. Got a 2-degree slacker head tube angle, now sits at 64.5 degrees. You have a steeper seat tube angle, that's at 78.6 degrees, and the reach has grown as well. On a size large, it used to be 475 millimeters, and now sits at 490 millimeters. So it's pretty long. They've made a bike that was thoroughly modern at the time. It was just a few months ago, like I said, and they've kind of stretched it even further. So it's now kind of at the forefront of the numbers that we're starting to see. Those numbers may seem scary to some people if you're kind of familiar with what the numbers are on your bike now, but keep in mind, they gave it a nice steep seat tube angle, and your effective top tube length is actually shorter on this than the one before. It's a lot of words, lots of numbers. What's all that mean? Well, when you sit on this bike, and if you sat on the one before it in the same size, it's not going to feel that much bigger. It does feel bigger when you stand up and you're descending. That's when those reach numbers are more noticeable, but overall, don't be afraid of that long reach number, because remember, they gave it a nice steep seat tube angle. This bike is designed to be run with a shorter stem. It did come with a 50 millimeter stem, which isn't that short in my book. I swapped it to a 40 millimeter stem already, but overall designed to use with a 30 to 40 millimeter or 50 if you want to go that route, but probably nothing much longer. You're going to feel pretty stretched out. They also changed the rear triangle a little bit in order to give it a little bit more clearance. Previous Commencals have had a tendency to kind of rub your calf sometimes some heel rub, just because of how kind of big and beefy they are. So they slimmed it down a little bit. It's still not super slim, so we'll see how that translates out on the trail. Other little frame details, plenty of room for a water bottle. You have internal cable routing, generous down tube and chain slap protection on the chain stays. You also even have a spot you could run a remote for a lockout for the rear shock. So if you had a coil or air shock and wanted to have a lockout mount on the bars, pop that little port up there. You can run the housing through the top tube and it would emerge it here as long as you had a compatible shock. Let's dive into the spec of this particular version. This is the Signature Edition, retails for $4,799. You get the Fox Float X2 rear shock. Up front, it's a new Fox 36, it's 160 millimeters. Shimano handles the drivetrain, it's got their XT 12-speed drivetrain. Shimano also handles the brakes, and that's where there's a kind of a strange spec choice, at least in my eyes. This bike has Shimano's XT 2-piston brakes. Now, a trail bike, 2-piston brakes seem fairly standard, but keep in mind that this bike, the smallest rotor it'll even accept is 200 millimeters. So it's definitely aimed for, kind of rowdier riding, big rotors. You would think big, powerful brakes, but it has that 2-piston version. We'll see what that translates to out on the trail. Like I said, I don't have very much time on this bike yet, so it might not be an issue at all. It's just something that I noticed while I was building it up. Other parts to highlight, we've got those Maxxis Dissector tires, front and rear. Again, a little bit interesting decision. That Dissector works great as a rear tire. Up front, it can work well in drier conditions, but if things get wet and sloppy, some riders may want to have something with a little bit more meat on it. One other spec choice that kind of caught my eye was that decision to go with a 150 millimeter KS dropper post. I kind of thought this would have something a little bit longer, especially since Commencal went out of their way to mention that the seat tubes are oversized. They're 34.9 millimeters now and shorter just to accommodate those longer posts. So kind of interesting choice. We'll see if it makes a difference out on the trail. One thing it didn't get is any lighter. This complete bike here weighs in at 33.9 pounds. So Commencal's never really been known for making the lightest bikes. It's never really been their goal either. That trend continues with this. It's really not much different in weight than the previous version. I only have one ride on this bike, so this really is a first ride. I'm gonna go on a second ride as soon as I'm done filming this, but for now, initial impressions, that steep seat tube angle is very noticeable, especially compared to the previous version. Previous version wasn't that slack, but on this one, you do notice that more upright position. If you haven't ridden a bike with a steeper seat tube angle, give it a little bit of time. It can feel strange at first, especially on flatter terrain. So far, I felt quite at home on this bike, really comfortable. It doesn't feel as long as those numbers suggest. It does have a pretty short back end, so kind of a good bike for goofing off a little bit. Plenty of room to maneuver up front. easy to whip the back end around. The suspension feels great as well. I need to spend some more time just really getting it dialed, get those settings perfect for my weight, riding style. But my initial first ride, it felt like I was pretty at home on the bike, more than I expected. So I'm excited to spend more time, really see what this bike can do and where it fits in the category. In the last year or so, we've seen a bunch of longer travel 29ers come out. That's kind of been the push lately. All these 170, 160. I'm sure some will come out, if not already, maybe 180 millimeter 29er. It's kind of nice to have a bike like this that has, seems like just enough travel to really push it. But then if you're on mellower trails, you don't feel like you're just kind of have too much bike. I know, how can you have too much bike? I feel like you can, especially if your local trails have more jumps and kind of things where you want to maneuver the bike quickly and not feel like you're fighting against the suspension. So I feel like this could hit a nice happy medium for a lot of riders in a lot of areas. Again, early days in testing. Look for a longer term review later this summer. There you have it. That's a rundown on the Meta TR. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, and to check out our podcast. You can find the link to that in the video description below. Thanks for watching.